You've been waiting for years. The night sweats, they're not as bad. The hot flashes come less often now, and you feel like you can finally breathe again. And so you're starting to ask that question, almost in a whisper. Is it finally over? Am I through it? Look, in 30 years of practice, I have seen thousands of women ask this exact question, all of them hoping they've finally crossed some kind of finish line. The truth is, the question isn't whether the storm is ending. The real question, the one nobody prepared you for, is what starts the day the rain stops. And understanding that changes everything. You were led to believe this was a temporary state you just had to survive. Get through it, and you'd come out the other side. But that entire time, your main reproductive hormone, estradiol, was in the process of dropping by over 95%. That isn't a temporary dip. It's a permanent shift to a new physiological state. And it's the single greatest silence in women's health. It's how 3/4 of women who could benefit from treatment are left without it. You are not failing. You were never told the truth about what was happening to you. What comes next isn't about your body going back to normal. It's about what happens when this new, quiet landscape begins, and why the most critical health risks of your life don't fade with the hot flashes. They begin. And I'm going to explain exactly how. This silence, it wasn't an accident. It was inherited. Think about your mother's generation or your grandmother's. They went through this in a complete blackout. They called it the change, and that was it, a closed door. It was something to be endured privately, a quiet suffering behind the curtains of middle age, and the symptoms were just ghosts. There was no language for the anxiety, the sleeplessness, the way their bodies began to feel like a stranger's. This wasn't a failure of love or connection. It was a failure of medicine. For decades, the subject was a footnote in medical training, if it was there at all. And this silence was passed down to you, not like a story, but like an empty space. And then, just when we were finally starting to have the conversation, everything went silent again. It happened in 2002. A single study, the Women's Health Initiative, or WHI, came out, and the headlines were terrifying. They screamed that hormone therapy caused breast cancer and heart attacks. And overnight, the world changed. Millions of women were pulled off their hormones cold turkey. An entire generation of doctors, my generation, was trained in the shadow of that fear. I saw it happen. We were taught that hormones were the fire, and our only job was to be the firefighter, using them as little as possible for as short a time as possible. The nuance, that the study had flaws, that it used older hormones on older women, that for many the benefits far outweighed the risks, all of it was lost in the panic. The conversation shifted from long-term health to short-term survival. And that is why, today, over 80% of OB/GYN residents graduate with no formal training in menopause management. They were taught the fear, but they were never taught the physiology. And that brings us to you, to right now. You walk into a doctor's office and you feel that dismissal, that sense that you're complaining, that it's just aging, that you should try yoga or a glass of wine. that isn't about you. It is the direct echo of that 20-year-old fear, combined with a century of silence. It's why the wellness industry has exploded with useless balancing teas and supplements. They rushed in to fill the massive void that medicine created. I had a patient just last month. Let's call her Sarah. She came in convinced she was losing her mind. For 3 years, her doctor told her the heart palpitations were just anxiety. Nobody once mentioned that estrogen receptors are all over her cardiovascular system. When I explained the mechanism to her, she just sat there and cried. Not from sadness, from relief. Because for the first time, she understood it wasn't in her head, and she was angry that nobody had told her sooner. Tell me in the comments, has a doctor ever made you feel like it was all in your head? Because what you're feeling is real, and it's the silence that's the problem. So let's be very clear about who failed you. It wasn't one person. It was a series of systems, creating a perfect storm of silence. On one side, you have the medical training programs that for 20 years taught a generation of doctors to fear hormones more than they understood them. They were taught how to manage a hot flash, not how to preserve a woman's long-term health. On the other side, an unregulated wellness industry that saw that void and built a $15 billion market on it. They sell you balance in a bottle, adrenal support for your fatigue, cooling mists for your skin. They are profiting, quite literally, from the very conversation your doctor was never trained to have with you. They are selling you a beautifully packaged version of the same silence. And it works because you were left with no other map. And who pays the price for that? You do, and millions of women just like you. Let me give you one specific, quiet example. Over 60% of postmenopausal women develop something called the genitourinary syndrome of menopause. That's the thinning of vaginal and urinary tissues because of estrogen loss. It's chronic, progressive, and a main reason women give up on intimacy, blaming themselves. It is a direct, treatable result of this hormonal shift. Yet only a fraction of women are ever diagnosed. They suffer in silence because they were told the story was over. The fading of hot flashes isn't your body adjusting. It means the estrogen is finally gone for good. And now the real story begins inside your bones, your blood vessels, and your brain, in over 400 different tissues that have receptors waiting for a hormone that is no longer there. Let me explain what is actually happening in your body. Think of it this way. Your body is a house with over 400 different rooms, and for decades, estrogen was the master key. It didn't just open the door to your reproductive system. It turned on the lights in your bones, your brain, your blood vessels, even your skin. The end of menopause isn't about the storm passing. It's the day the power gets cut. Suddenly, all those rooms go dark. The hot flashes? That was just the sound of the fuse box blowing. The real story is what happens in the quiet darkness of those rooms. Your joints start to ache because the receptors that managed inflammation are offline. Your skin gets dry for the same reason. It is not aging. That is a hormone shift nobody explained to you. And every system in your body starts trying to function in the dark, which is why a fatigue settles in that no amount of sleep can fix. But what happens when the body panics in that darkness? That's when another system takes over. I went through this myself at 52. I still remember the exact morning, standing at my kitchen sink, and I felt this profound sense of internal vibration, a humming anxiety I couldn't place. And I saw the shift in my own body, that stubborn ring of fat around my middle that appeared out of nowhere. I was a doctor who should have known, but I felt like a stranger in my own skin. That is your HPA axis, your stress response system, going into overdrive. Without estrogen to help manage it, your body floods with cortisol. Cortisol screams danger and tells your body to store energy as visceral fat, the most inflammatory kind. In my 30 years of practice, I have seen this exact pattern thousands of times. And it's often paired with the loss of testosterone, which can drop by half by this stage. But it's a hormone almost never tested in women, leaving them with crushing fatigue and a flat mood. It's a perfect storm of hormonal signals that doctors misread as just stress. But this is not just stress. And what's happening in your brain is even more frightening. Your brain is the most estrogen-sensitive organ in your body. It's not just for mood, it's for energy, for clarity, for memory. Estrogen helps conduct the symphony between your neurochemicals, especially serotonin and dopamine. When estrogen is gone, the conductor has left the building. The orchestra is in chaos. That is the brain fog. That is the word-finding difficulty. That is the sudden onset anxiety or depression that makes you feel like you are losing your mind. It's why nearly 40% of women in this transition are first offered an antidepressant before anyone ever mentions the word hormone. You are not crazy. You are not alone. Your brain chemistry has been fundamentally altered, and you're feeling the results of a neurological power outage. But proving it isn't a feeling is the next step. So let's connect this invisible mechanism to the hard clinical reality. Let's talk about what the silence is really costing you. Okay, let's talk about the timeline. That day you mark on the calendar, 12 months to the day since your last period, that is not a finish line, it is a starting line. You are now, clinically, post-menopausal. It's just a definition, not a feeling. And what starts on that day is a quiet, invisible process. For example, in the first 5 to 7 years after that final period, you can lose up to 20% of your total bone density. You don't feel it. There's no symptom. It's happening silently, inside your skeleton, because the estrogen that was signaling your bones to rebuild is gone. And this is the part nobody tells you. The fading of the hot flashes doesn't mean your body has adjusted. It means the estrogen is finally low enough for the silent damage to begin in earnest. Now let's talk about your heart. For your entire adult life, estrogen was your cardiovascular guardian. It kept your blood vessels flexible. It helped manage your cholesterol. It protected you. Once that protection is gone, the landscape changes completely. Within 10 years of your final period, your risk of heart disease rises to equal that of a man your age. It becomes the #1 killer of women over 60. That isn't a coincidence. It's a direct consequence of this hormonal shift. And that mild anxiety you might still be feeling, that feeling of your heart racing for no reason, It's often the echo of your cardiovascular system learning to function without its lifelong regulator. It's your body sending a signal that the environment has changed. And we were trained to call it anxiety instead of what it is, a physiological alarm. I had a woman in my office just a few weeks ago. Let's call her Jane. She was 56 and she sat down and just sighed. She told me, "I feel like I'm doing everything right, but my body is betraying me. I'm eating clean, I'm in the gym 4 days a week, and I've gained 15 pounds around my waist that will not move." She was exhausted and felt like a failure. I explained to her that without estrogen to help her body use insulin effectively, she had become more insulin resistant. That, combined with the spike in cortisol, was signaling her body to hoard fat around her organs. It wasn't about her willpower. It was her biochemistry. The look on her face, it was this wave of anger and then just immense relief. She finally understood she wasn't failing a diet. A system had failed to tell her the rules of the game had changed. And this is where it all connects. Why are you so tired? Why does the weight cling to you differently? It's not just cortisol. The loss of estrogen fundamentally changes your sleep architecture. You get less deep sleep and less REM sleep, even if you're in bed for 8 hours. That poor quality sleep is what sends your cortisol levels even higher the next day, which in turn worsens your insulin resistance. It's a vicious cycle. One system pulls down another. And that's why the old rules, just eat less and move more, suddenly stop working. You're trying to use a map for a country you are no longer in. You are fighting a new physiology with old strategies. And you are exhausted because nobody ever told you that you needed a new map. So let me explain what is really happening in your body. This isn't a recovery. This is a permanent shift to a new operating system. It's like your body ran on one type of fuel for 40 years, and now it has to run on another. And that new fuel creates different vulnerabilities. The hot flashes were just the loud, messy sound of the engine sputtering as it made the switch. But the real story is the quiet, long-term performance of that engine now that it's running on this new baseline. It's about how it affects your bones, your heart, your brain, and your metabolism for the next 30 or 40 years of your life. You weren't crossing a finish line. You were stepping into a new landscape, and they never gave you the right map. This is the moment the floor gives way. It's when you've been doing everything right for months, maybe even years. You're eating the salad. You're walking the miles. You're getting to bed on time. And yet, that stubborn ring of fat around your middle is like a permanent life raft. The exhaustion is so deep, it feels like it's in your bones. You stand in the kitchen and can't remember the word for a colander. That isn't a personal failing. It is the biochemical turning point. It's the moment you finally understand that your willpower, no matter how strong, is no match for a body running on cortisol and insulin resistance, a loop created by the absence of estrogen. That stubborn fat, that bone-deep fatigue, that mental fog, that is not aging. That is a hormone shift nobody explained to you. It's the physical proof that you have been fighting the wrong war. And the feeling that comes with that realization, it's a cold, quiet anger. It's the understanding that you have been blaming yourself for a physiological process. Your body is not betraying you. It has been ignored. It has been sending signals that were misinterpreted as personal flaws, as laziness, as emotional weakness, by a system that never learned its language. I see that anger rise in my office every single week, and my job in that moment is to meet it with the truth. To look a woman in the eye and say, "You are not crazy. You are not alone. You have been trying to solve a hormonal problem with discipline, and it was never going to work." This is the abyss. It's the moment you stop falling and realize the ground was taken away from you years ago, and nobody thought it was important enough to tell you. And so you wait, thinking the worst is over. But what happens in the next 1 to 3 years if you keep accepting this silence? The hot flashes may fade, but a deeper exhaustion sets in. The sleep you get isn't restorative, and that slow erosion of rest begins to carve away at your mood, your patience, your memory. This is when the strain shows up in your relationships. The intimacy that feels painful isn't a rejection of your partner. It's the physical reality of thinning tissues nobody told you was treatable. The irritability isn't you becoming difficult. It's your nervous system running on empty. And every month that passes with you feeling this way, the self-blame gets heavier. You become more convinced that this is a personal failing, a defect in your character, when it is the direct, predictable outcome of an untreated hormonal shift. Then we look at the next 3 to 10 years. This is the critical window where the silent damage accelerates. Inside your bones, the architecture is becoming more fragile day by day. You don't feel it. On the outside, you look the same. But the density that protects you from a life-altering fracture is quietly diminishing. At the same time, your cardiovascular risk is climbing. The cholesterol numbers start to creep up. The blood pressure that was always perfect is now something to watch. These are not separate, random events of getting older. They are the direct result of losing your body's most powerful guardian, and it is all happening in complete silence. The genitourinary symptoms, the dryness and discomfort you hoped would just go away, they don't. They become a chronic condition, slowly robbing you of comfort and confidence, because it is a progressive syndrome that never, ever resolves on its own. 10, 20, 30 years down the line, the silence costs you your independence. The bone loss that started at 51 becomes the hip fracture at 71. 1 in 2 women over 50 will suffer an osteoporotic fracture in their remaining lifetime. The cardiovascular risk that began climbing in your 50s becomes the heart attack in your 60s. It is the #1 killer of women. And the brain, which ran for decades on a neuroprotective hormone, becomes more vulnerable to cognitive decline and dementia. You see a life diminished not by age, but by a silence that was always optional. The psychological cost is happening right now. That humming anxiety that settles in your chest, that's reported by up to 70% of women in this transition. Depression rates double, and with it comes profound shame, this feeling that you're the only one who can't cope. You see other women your age, and they seem fine, So you stay quiet, you isolate. You believe the silence is proof of your own weakness. This story is not a narrative of personal failure. It is the story of a body sending clear signals that were systematically ignored. You have been fighting your own biochemistry, armed with nothing but willpower and shame. The physical costs are measurable. The emotional toll is immense. But this is not your fault. This is inherited silence with a measurable physical price. What now? The silence finally breaks, and you get to choose what comes next. The goal is no longer just to get through the symptoms. The real goal is to create a strategy for long-term health inside a body that runs on a new hormonal operating system. This is not about a supplement or a magic tea. It is about shifting the entire conversation. You stop asking, "How do I make the symptoms stop?" and start asking a doctor who understands this physiology. How do we protect my bones, my heart, and my brain for the next 40 years? This is hard. Hearing this can bring up anger and grief for the years you spent blaming yourself. But you are not failing. You were never told the truth, and that silence was a choice made by systems, not by you. Now you have the one thing they could never take away. You have the language. You understand the mechanism. You are no longer a woman with a broken body. You are a woman who finally understands the clinical reality of her own physiology. The silence ends because you now know exactly what it was hiding. Understanding the mechanism is only the first step. You now have to become your own advocate. In the next one, we're going to talk about the essential conversations you must have with your doctor. Because knowing the truth is not enough. You have to know how to use it.